I am telling you this story now, after the world settled back into its shape, or rather, into a new shape I had never imagined possible. It's a story about scars. The ones you can see, and the ones you can't. It's the story of how a man who was covered in them, a man who lived behind a fortress of them, finally let someone touch them. And that someone was me. They say love is blind. But for me, it was the other way around. My blindness was what allowed me to truly see. It began in a place of noise and shattering light I could only feel, a place of polished cruelty and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with despair. My despair. My world had been shrinking for years, ever since the fever stole my sight at 19. It had not become a world of darkness, as sighted people assumed. It was a world of texture, of sound, of temperature. The smooth, cool wood of my massage table. The geography of knots in a client's back. The particular rhythm of my brother Leo's footsteps, a shuffling beat that had grown heavier as his own world began to dim. He had what the doctors called a degenerative condition, a cruel irony the universe had seen fit to bestow upon our small family. My sight was gone. His was going. But there was a surgery, a fantastically expensive, astronomically complex procedure that existed like a fairy tale, a distant star of hope in our cramped, two-room apartment that always smelled of rubbing alcohol in yesterday's tea. We had no money. My work as a masseuse, building a small, loyal clientele who valued the intuition in my hands, paid for our rent and Leo's medication. It did not pay for miracles. That was where Julian Thorne came in. Julian was a miracle monger, or so his reputation claimed. He was the head of the Thorne Foundation for Visual Wellness, a man whose photograph was always in the society pages, his smile as bright and sterile as a hospital corridor. His foundation had, after months of applications and interviews, promised to cover Leo's surgery. The letter of approval was the most precious thing I had ever held. Its crisp edges, the embossed letterhead. I had traced it 100 times, as if I could read the ink with my fingertips. Then, a week before the scheduled procedure, the calls stopped being returned. Emails went unanswered. A wall of polite, impenetrable silence rose around the Thorne Foundation. Panic, cold and sharp, began to wind its way around my ribs. Leo was getting worse. He'd started bumping into furniture. He'd stopped trying to read, the frustration too much for him. The shuffling of his feet became the soundtrack to my rising terror. So I did the only thing I could. I went to him. The foundation was hosting its annual visionary ball at the city's grandest hotel. I put on my one good dress, a simple black sheath a client had given me, and took a bus that felt like it was rattling my bones apart. I didn't have a ticket. I stood outside for what felt like an eternity, a small, blind woman in a sea of flashing camera bulbs and the murmur of expensive fabrics. Finally, I found a sympathetic security guard, a man whose voice was rough with kindness, and I told him my story. He let me in through a service entrance, leading me to the edge of the grand ballroom. The room was an assault, a wall of sound, clinking glasses, booming music, 100 conversations layered one on top of the other. The air vibrated with it. I felt dizzy, a small boat in a churning ocean. I waited. I waited until I heard his voice, the one I knew from the Foundation's promotional videos. Julian Thorne. His voice was polished by other people's admiration, smooth and confident. I moved toward the sound, my hand outstretched, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Mr. Thorne, the bubble of conversation around him popped. Silence spread outwards from me like a ripple. Yes. His voice was cooler now, laced with surprise. It's Alara Vance. My brother, Leo Vance. You were funding his surgery. My own voice was a thin, trembling thread. I felt, more than saw, him turn fully towards me. I could feel the heat of nearby bodies, the collective intake of breath. I'm sorry, he said, and the warmth was back, a performance for the crowd. I think you're mistaken. We have many applicants. No, I insisted, my desperation making me bold. We have the letter. The surgery is next week. No one will call me back. Please, my brother is. Miss Vance, he cut in, his voice dropping slightly, a blade wrapped in velvet. I think you're overwrought. This isn't the time or the place. He was dismissing me in front of everyone. The shame was a physical heat crawling up my neck. But the promise, I whispered, holding out the folded letter I had brought with me, my last piece of hope. You promised. A woman laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. Julian, darling, who is this? The voice was high, dripping with condescension. No one, Serafina, Julian said. Just a misunderstanding. He took a step closer. I could smell his cologne, something sharp and citrusy. He lowered his voice so only I could hear it. You are making a scene, he hissed, the velvet gone, only the blade remaining. I told you I would handle it. This is not how you ask. This is how you get nothing. His words hit me harder than a slap. He had been to our apartment. He had charmed Leo. He had sat on our lumpy sofa and spoken of hope, all while his eyes, as Leo had described them, roamed over me with an unnerving intensity. I had felt his gaze like a physical touch, and had dismissed it as a necessary evil. Now I understood. This was a punishment. A power play. This is a public charity event, Miss Vance, he said, his voice rising again for the audience. We cannot be seen capitulating to emotional demands. It would set a terrible precedent. The crowd murmured in agreement. I was no longer a desperate sister. I was a demand, an emotional problem. Now, if you'll excuse us, he said, his tone final. I felt a hand on my arm, firm and dismissive, guiding me away. Security. The humiliation was complete. It was a physical force, a wave that broke over me, leaving me gasping. Tears I had refused to shed burned behind my eyes. I stumbled away from the guard's grasp, my one instinct to run, to escape the sound, the judgment, the crushing weight of it all. I didn't know where I was going. I pushed through a heavy door, expecting the cool night air. Instead, I found silence. The sudden, absolute quiet was more shocking than the noise had been. The air was cool, still, and smelled of ozone and something else. Something like iron. Like danger. I had stumbled out of the ballroom and into its opposite. I took a hesitant step forward, my hand trailing along a wall that was not papered silk, but cold, smooth steel. An elevator? No, the room was too large. Do not move. The voice was not loud, but it filled the silence completely. It was low, rough, like stone grating on stone. It held an authority so absolute it rooted my feet to the floor. I heard two distinct movements in front of me. The soft scuff of leather on carpet. The click of metal. A safety being disengaged. My breath caught in my throat. The despair from the ballroom was instantly replaced by a new, much sharper fear. Marcus! It was the same voice. A single word. A command. I heard another click. The safety being re-engaged. The immediate threat receded, but the tension in the room remained a coiled spring. Turn around, the voice said. Slowly, I did as I was told, my body stiff with fear. I faced the direction of the voice. I could feel the presence of at least 3 people in the room. 2 were still like statues. One was a locus of immense calm, the source of the voice. Who are you? He asked. His tone was not curious. It was a demand for data. My name is Alara Vance. I whispered. I am sorry. I was looking for an exit. I took the wrong door. The silence stretched. I felt as if I were being examined under a microscope. As if my heartbeat, my scent, the very texture of my fear were being cataloged. You are not looking for an exit, the voice stated. It was not a question. You are running. I flinched. He was right. From who? He asked. The question was quiet, but it landed like a stone. It was not the what of the ballroom crowd. It was the who. Personal. Specific. It doesn't matter. I mumbled, shame flooding me again. I'll leave. I tried to take a step back towards the door I'd come through. I told you not to move, he said, and the quiet command froze me once more. I heard the soft rustle of expensive cloth. He was moving closer. I could feel the shift in the air, the displacement of his presence. He stopped a few feet from me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "In your hand," he said. "What is it?" I looked down at my own hand, which was clenched into a tight fist. I had forgotten I was still holding it. Julian's letter. Now a crumpled, pathetic ball of paper. "It's nothing," I said, my voice tight. "Give it to me." It was not a request. I hesitated. It was my last shred of a broken promise, the evidence of my humiliation. Now, my fingers of their own accord uncurled. I held out the crumpled paper. A large, warm hand enveloped mine for a brief second. His fingers were calloused, but the touch was surprisingly gentle as he plucked the paper from my palm. I heard the sound of him smoothing it out. The silence that followed was different. It was analytical. "Thorn," he said, the name sounding like a curse on his tongue. I flinched at the name. "He is the one who made you run," the man stated. Again, not a question. A conclusion. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. "Why?" The story came tumbling out, a torrent of whispered, broken sentences. Lau, the surgery, the promise, the public denial. I didn't tell him about the way Julian looked at me, the possessive undertone. I just gave him the facts. When I finished, the room was utterly still. I expected dismissal. Or worse, pity. I got neither. "Your brother," he said, his voice flat. "Where is he?" "At home," I answered, confused by the question. "The surgery he needs." "Which hospital?" "St. Jude's General. But they can't do it without the funds. The foundation was supposed to." "The foundation is irrelevant," he cut me off. He turned away from me. I heard him speak to the other man. "Marcus, get Dr. Al-Jamil on the phone. I don't care if he's in Zurich. Have a jet ready in an hour. He's operating on a boy named Leo Vance. Here, tonight." My head snapped up. Dr. Al-Jamil was the surgeon. The best in the world. The one Julian had promised. Clear the entire west wing of St. Michael's private. The boy and his sister will be comfortable there. Handle the transfer from their apartment. "And Marcus?" "Sir." The other man's voice was deep and deferential. "By the hospital." I stopped breathing. By the hospital. The words didn't compute. They were from a different reality. "Wait," I stammered, finding my voice. "No, you don't understand. I can't pay for that." The man turned back to me. I felt his presence settle before me again, a mountain of stillness. "I am not asking you to," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't want your charity," I said, my pride, foolish as it was, flaring up. "I just escaped one monster. I won't indebt myself to another." The silence in the room became heavy, dangerous. I felt one of the other men shift, a subtle threat. Then I heard a sound I did not expect. A low, rough chuckle. It was not a sound of humor. It was a sound of surprise. "You think I'm a monster," he said. "I don't know what you are," I admitted honestly. "But no one does. That, out of kindness." "I'm not kind," he agreed, his voice flat again. "I am efficient. Your brother needs a surgeon. I have the best surgeon. Julian Thorne used your hope as a leash. I'm simply removing it." He took a step closer. "This is not a negotiation, Miss Vance. Your pride is a luxury. Your brother's sight is a necessity. My man will take you to him. You will go to the hospital. The surgery will happen." His logic was a cold, clean blade that cut through my fear and my pride. He was right. Leo's sight was all that mattered. My foolish dignity meant nothing next to that. "Why?" I whispered, the question I couldn't stop myself from asking. "Why are you doing this?" There was a long pause. I felt his gaze on me, intense and unreadable. "Because I dislike men like Julian Thorne," he said finally, his voice dropping into a register of pure ice. "Men who break their promises. And because you did not scream when my man drew his weapon." He paused again. "You stood your ground. That is rare." I didn't know what to say to that. "Marcus will escort you," he said, his tone shifting back to business. He turned and walked away. I heard a door open and close. He was gone. I was left in the silent room with a man named Marcus. Miss Vance, the deep voice said, much closer now. If you'll come with me. His hand gently touched my elbow. It was the beginning. The moment I stepped out of my world and into his. The next few hours were a blur of controlled, quiet efficiency. Marcus, the silent enforcer, was a calming presence despite the obvious danger he represented. He moved with a quiet purpose that soothed my frayed nerves. We did not go back through the hotel. He led me down a service corridor into a silent, carpeted garage that smelled of cold concrete and gasoline. A car door opened. The interior was leather, cool, and smooth against my skin. The ride was unnaturally quiet, the car a gliding bubble of silence through the city. We arrived at my apartment building. Marcus simply said, "Wait here," and was gone. I sat in the silent car, my hands clenched in my lap, my mind reeling. By the hospital, the words echoed. It was a level of power I couldn't comprehend. It was terrifying. Less than 15 minutes later, Marcus returned. He was not alone. Alara. Leo's voice was thin with sleep and confusion. "What's going on?" "This man," he said. "It's okay, Leo," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We're going to hospital. For your surgery." Marcus helped Leo into the car. My brother, small and frail, huddled next to me, his hand finding mine and gripping it tight. "But how?" he whispered. Julian said. "It's not Julian," I said softly. "It's someone else. Someone else." A man with a voice like stone and the power to move mountains with a phone call. St. Michael's private hospital was nothing like St. Jude's General. The air didn't smell of antiseptic and sickness. It smelled faintly of lavender. The floors were carpeted, muffling our footsteps. We were led to a private wing. A suite, not a room. It had a sitting area and a bedroom for me, separate from Leo's. A nurse with a soft voice and gentle hands came to check on Leo. She spoke of Dr. Al-Jamil being on his way. She spoke of prepping for surgery in the morning. It was all happening. It was real. I sat in a plush armchair in the sitting area after Leo had been settled, listening to the quiet hum of the building. I should have been relieved. And I was. A part of me was soaring with a desperate, frantic gratitude. But another part was terrified. I had traded a gilded cage for a diamond one. I had no idea what the price of this cage would be. I must have drifted off. I was woken by the soft click of the suite door opening. I sat up, my heart starting to pound. "It's just me," a familiar deep voice said from the doorway. "Marcus." "He is here," Marcus said. "He wants to know if you are comfortable." "He?" "The man from the silent room." "Ah, yes. Thank you," I stammered. There was a pause. "He is waiting outside the surgery wing," Marcus supplied. "He has been here for hours." The information landed strangely. Why? Why would a man who could buy a hospital wait in a corridor like a nervous family member? "He is tense," Marcus added, and for the first time, there was a hint of something other than pure professionalism in his voice. A hint of concern. And then an idea sparked in my mind. A way to do something. A way to feel less like a charity case and more like myself. "I'm a masseuse," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "A therapeutic masseuse. If he is tense, I can help. It's the only way I can." "Hey," I finished lamely, feeling foolish. What would a man like him want with a massage from me? Marcus was silent for a long moment. "I will ask," he said, and then he was gone. I waited, my cheeks burning. It was a stupid, impulsive offer. But a few minutes later, Marcus returned. "He accepts," he said, his voice flat, but I could hear the surprise underneath it. "He is in the adjoining room." The adjoining room was another suite, identical to ours, but feeling completely different. The air was colder and held the same faint scent of iron and ozone from the back room of the hotel. The man was standing by the window, his back to me. He was a large man, tall and broad. Even from across the room, I could feel the coiled stillness in him. He was wearing a dark suit, the jacket still on. "Mr. I began, and then realized I didn't even know his name. "Kalen," he said, without turning around. Just the one word. "Kalen." "There is a massage table," he said, his voice gesturing towards the corner of the room. Set up for you. Of course there was. I found it, a professional-grade table, its surface cool and smooth. There were oils and lotions on a small tray beside it, high-end, unscented. Everything had been thought of. I took a bottle of oil, warming it between my hands, the familiar ritual calming my nerves. You can remove your jacket and shirt, I said, my voice more professional than I felt, and lie face down. I heard the rustle of clothing, the heavy sound of a suit jacket being placed on a chair, the softer sound of shirt. Then, the slight dip of the table as he lay down. I approached, my hands slick with oil. This was my territory. This was my world. In this, I was not blind or helpless. I was an expert. I placed my hands on his back. An eye froze. His skin was a landscape, a roadmap of violence. It was a tapestry of scars. I had felt scars on clients before. The silvery track of a C-section. The puckered skin from an old sports injury. This was different. This was a story written in raised, jagged lines. Some were thin and fine, like surgical incisions. Others were wide, ragged, the memory of a wound that had torn rather than cut. There was the distinct, circular pucker of an old bullet wound near his left shoulder blade. Another on his lower back. My hands, which knew the language of muscle and sinew, were suddenly reading a brutal, unfamiliar epic. He went utterly still beneath my touch. Stiller than he had been before, if that were possible. He was a block of granite. I could feel the tension in him, a furious, vibrating energy held in check by sheer force of will. Most people would have flinched away. Or worse, asked questions. I did neither. I took a breath, and I began to work. My hands did not avoid the scars. They acknowledged them. They treated them as part of the terrain of him. I worked on the muscles around them, the places where the body had clenched in on itself to protect the injury and had never quite learned to let go. The knots in his shoulders were stones. Hard, unforgiving. They spoke of immense, constant pressure, the weight of a world. I worked slowly, patiently, using my thumbs, my palms, the edge of my hands. I didn't speak. The only sounds were the slick slide of my hands on his skin and his own tightly controlled breathing. After about 10 minutes, I felt a subtle shift, a fractional, almost imperceptible release in the tension under my fingers. A muscle that had been locked for what felt like years gave a slight tremor and softened. He let out a breath, a quiet, shaky exhalation that he probably thought I didn't hear. But I heard everything. I continued to work, my focus absolute. My hands traced the story his body told. Protection, attack, survival, pain, old and new, layered like sediment. And beneath it all, an astonishing, stubborn strength. I did not see him as a monster. I did not see him as a savior. In that room, with my hands on his back, I saw him simply as a man who had endured an impossible amount of damage and was still, somehow, holding himself together. When I finished, I gently wiped the excess oil from his back with a towel. My own arms ached with the effort. He had not moved. I'm done, I said softly. He was silent for a long moment. Then he pushed himself up, his movements fluid and powerful. I heard him put his shirt and jacket back on. I stood by the table, waiting. He walked over to me. He stopped so close I could feel the warmth of his body again. No one touches them, he said, his voice a low rumble. I knew what he meant. The scars. You did not flinch, he stated. They are a part of you, I said simply. To ignore them would be a lie. The silence between us was different now. Not tense. Charged. Your brother's surgery is at 7 a.m., he said, his voice back to its usual flat tone, but I could hear the subtle difference underneath. All Yamil is confident. Thank you, I whispered. Go get some rest, he said. It was a command, but it sounded almost like a request. I turned and left his suite, my own body humming with a strange new energy. I had touched the beast and found the man, and it terrified me more than anything else. Leo's surgery was a success. I spent the day in a haze of fear and hope, sitting in the private waiting room Kalen had provided. He was not there. Marcus was a silent, reassuring presence by the door. When Dr. Al-Jamil finally came out, his voice calm and confident, and told me that everything had gone perfectly, the relief was so overwhelming I almost collapsed. Marcus's hand was suddenly on my elbow, steadying me. "He is stable," the silent man said. "He is safe." The days that followed settled into a strange routine. Leo recovered in his luxurious room, attended by nurses who treated him like a prince. His eyes were bandaged, and he was restless, but for the first time in years, he was filled with a buoyant, infectious hope. I spent my time with him, reading to him, talking to him, just being there. And every evening, Marcus would appear. "He asked if you were available," he would say. And I would go to the adjoining suite where Kalen would be waiting. Each session was the same. He would remove his shirt, lie on the table, and I would place my hands on the scarred landscape of his back. I was learning him. I was learning the language of his pain, the deep, chronic tension in his right shoulder from a lifetime of watchfulness. The way the muscles in his lower back seized up when a deal, as he sometimes vaguely mentioned, was going poorly. He rarely spoke, but in the silence, I felt a strange connection forming. He was letting me in, not through words, but through the guarded, honest truth of his own body. He never told me what he did. I never asked. The words mafia boss or gangster floated in my mind, but they felt like cheap labels for the complex reality of the man under my hands. He was a protector and a predator, a tyrant and a guardian. He was the storm that had saved me from the flood. One evening, about a week after the surgery, the peace was shattered. I was in Kalen's suite, just beginning to work on the familiar knots in his shoulders, when the door opened without a knock. Kalen went rigid under my hands, a transformation so sudden and complete it was shocking. He was off the table and had a weapon in his hand before I even registered what was happening. I heard the sound, the same click of a safety catch from that first night. "Sir," Marcus's voice said, calm but urgent. "You have a visitor." He insisted. "Who?" Kalen's voice was pure ice. "Julian Thorne." My blood ran cold. Kalen was silent for a beat. "Let him in," he said, his voice dangerously soft. I heard him place the weapon on a table with a soft thud. He did not put his shirt back on. I stood frozen by the massage table, my hands still slick with oil. Julian walked in. I could smell his sharp, citrus cologne before I heard his voice. Well, Julian said, his tone oozing a false, cheerful surprise. "This is cozy. I was told my dear Lara was here. I see she's found a new patron." The way he said the word patron made it sound filthy. "Get out, Julian," I said, my voice trembling. Now, Alara, is that any way to speak to an old friend? I came to see how Leo is doing. I heard there was a miraculous recovery. I'm so pleased my foundation could, indirectly, be of service. His voice was a snake, coiling around the room. "You are not welcome here, Thorne," Kalen said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through Julian's smug tone like a razor. "Ah, the man of the hour," Julian said. "Kalen Rock. I should have known. When the vultures start circling, you're never far behind. Though I confess, I didn't take you for one to pick up strays." I felt Kalen take a step forward. The air crackled. "She is under my protection," Kalen stated simply. The words hung in the air. A declaration. A threat. Julian laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. "Protection? Is that what you call it? I wonder what the press would call it. Blind, destitute girl taken in by the city's most notorious recluse. It has a certain fairy tale quality to it. Or perhaps a horror story. It depends on the telling, doesn't it? This was a threat. A public one. I could ruin you, Alara," Julian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A few calls, a few well-placed stories. The girl who uses her blindness to manipulate wealthy men. First me, now him. It's a compelling narrative. You wouldn't dare," I whispered, horrified. "Oh, I would," he said. "Or you could be sensible. Come back to me. Apologize for your little scene. I'm a forgiving man. Kalen Rock is a temporary solution. I'm a permanent one. I can give you and your brother a good life." A respectable 1 inch. It was an ultimatum. Bondage with him or destruction from him. I felt sick. Kalen had been silent through all of this. Now he spoke. His voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear it. "Marcus," he said. "Sir," the ever-present lieutenant replied from the doorway. "Show Mr. Thorne the evidence we have compiled on the Thorne Foundation's financial irregularities," Kalen said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Specifically, the accounts in the Caymans, and the audio recording of his conversation with Senator Albright's wife. I believe he'll find it compelling." The room went dead silent. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Julian. "You're bluffing," Julian snapped, but his voice had lost its confident edge. It was thin, brittle. "I do not bluff, Thorne," Kalen said. "I build cases. You have built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. I will not blow it over. I will simply pull out the card at the bottom and watch it all fall." He took another step towards Julian. "You will not speak her name again. You will not come near her or her brother again. The stories you plan to leak about her will be replaced by stories about you. About embezzlement. About extortion. About what a monster you are when the cameras are off." Each word was a hammer blow. "If I see you, if I hear of you, if I even dream that you are thinking about her," Kalen continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "I will dismantle your life so completely, you will not even have a name left to be ruined." There was a long, ringing silence. I heard the sound of fabric as Julian took a hasty step back. "Get out," Kalen commanded. I heard Julian practically scramble from the room. The door closed. The room was silent again, but the echo of the confrontation remained. I was shaking. Kalen had not just protected me. He had waged a silent, invisible war on my behalf. He walked back towards me. He stopped in front of me, and I felt his hand come up, not touching, just hovering near my face. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was gruff, but the concern was undeniable. I could only nod. "He won't bother you again," he stated. I believed him. "What?" I asked again, the same question as that first night, but it meant something different now. It wasn't just about Leo's surgery anymore. This was personal. He had defended my honor, my name. He was silent for a long time. I felt him looking at me, his gaze of physical weight. "Lie down," I whispered, my professional instincts taking over, a desperate need to do something, to give something back. He hesitated. "Please," I said. After a moment, he moved back to the table and lay down. I placed my hands on his back. The muscles were steel cables, tighter than I had ever felt them. The confrontation had cost him. He had absorbed the stress, the threat, the violence of it, and locked it into his own body. This time, as I worked, it was different. I was no longer just a masseuse. I was an ally. I was tracing the lines of a battle he had fought for me. My hands were no longer just reading his scars. They were thanking him. They were telling him, in the only language I had, that I saw him. I saw the man who hid his protectiveness behind a wall of brutality. The man who used his immense, terrifying power not to crush, but to shield. Under my hands, for the first time, I felt the great fortress of Kalen rock tremble. Not from weakness, but from the unbearable, unfamiliar weight of being cared for. The quiet war Kalen had promised was swift and brutal. It didn't happen with shouting or public accusations. It happened in whispers, in the sudden chill of the city's elite turning their backs on a fallen star. The day after Julian's visit, a small, discreet article appeared on the financial pages of a major newspaper. It spoke of an anonymous tip leading to an investigation into a prominent charitable foundation for financial irregularities. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. The next day, two of the Thorne Foundation's biggest donors publicly withdrew their support, citing a need for greater transparency. The house of cards was beginning to tremble. I didn't see any of this, of course. Marcus told me. He would appear each morning with a quiet update, his voice a flat recitation of facts that were shaking the city's foundations. Thorne has been asked to step down from the museum board. His sister attempted to do damage control. It did not go well. The federal investigators have subpoenaed their records. I listened to it all from the serene bubble of the hospital suite. It felt like watching a storm rage from behind a pane of unbreakable glass. Kalen, in our evening sessions, never mentioned it. He would come in, the weight of his silent war etched into the lines of his shoulders, and lie on the table. Our communication remained in the realm of touch. My hands would find the new tension, the fresh knots formed by his battles, and I would work to smooth them away. And he, in turn, would allow it. He would allow me into his guarded physical space, a trust that felt more profound than any whispered secret. One evening, Leo, whose bandages were due to come off in 2 days, asked the question I had been dreading. "Elara," he said, his voice clear and stronger than it had been in years. "Who is he, this Mr. Rock?" I hesitated, my hand stilling on the book I was reading to him. "He's the man who helped us, Leo. I know that," he said patiently. "But who is he?" The nurses get quiet when his name is mentioned. There's a guard outside our door all the time. This isn't normal. He was right. It wasn't normal. "He's a powerful man, Leo," I said carefully. "A private man. Is he a good man?" The simple, childish question hung in the air. Is he a good man? What was the answer? He had used terrifying power to save my brother. He had dismantled a man's life with cold precision. He was covered in the evidence of a violent life. But he had been gentle with me. He had waited in a hospital corridor. Let me touch his scars. "He has been good to us," I said finally. It was the only truth I had. The day the bandages were to come off, a different kind of tension filled the room. Hope so bright it was almost painful. Dr. Al-Jamil arrived, his presence calm and reassuring. Kalen was not there. But Marcus stood by the door, a silent, unmovable sentinel. I held Leo's hand as the doctor began to gently unwind the gauze. My own heart was pounding so hard I could feel in my throat. The last of the bandages came away. There was a profound silence. "Slowly, Leo," the doctor said. "Blink a few times. Let your eyes adjust." I felt Leo's hand tighten on mine. He blinked. Another long silence. Then a choked, wondrous sound came from my brother. "Elara," he whispered. His voice was filled with an awe that broke my heart. He was looking at me, really looking at me for the first time in years. You're beautiful," he breathed. Tears I hadn't even known were there began to stream down my face. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his gaze, a warm, loving touch on my face. He could see. It was a miracle. A dark, complicated, terrifying miracle, bought and paid for by a man of scars and secrets. But it was a miracle nonetheless. That night, Kalen did not send Marcus. He came himself. He knocked softly on the door of my suite. I was sitting by the window, listening to the soft, even breathing of my sleeping, sighted brother. "Come in," I said. He entered, and the atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming charged and intimate. He did not speak. He simply walked to the window and stood beside me. We stood in silence for a long time, the sounds of the city a distant hum below. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for what you gave him, for what you gave me." "It was not a gift," he said, his voice low. "It was a correction. The world was wrong. I made it right. Such arrogance. Such power. And yet, he had used it to give my brother back the world. What happens now?" I asked, the question that had been hovering in the back of my mind. Leo was well. Julian was gone. The debt, whatever it was, felt paid. "Now," he said, "you are free." The words should have been a relief. It felt like a loss. "You and your brother can go home," he continued, his voice flat. "I have arranged for a fund to be set up for his continued care and education. You will not have to worry about money again." He was cutting the ties, setting me adrift from his dark, safe harbor. Panic, cold and unwelcome, fluttered in my chest. I had grown used to his presence, to the strange safety of his dangerous world. "And you?" I asked. "I will continue as I am." The thought of not seeing him again, of not having our strange, silent communion in the evenings, left an ache in my chest so sharp it made me gasp. I reached out, my hand finding his arm. The muscle was like iron beneath his suit jacket. He did not pull away. I don't want to go, I whispered, the admission torn from me. He went very still. You are free, Ilara, he repeated, but there was a crack in the tone of his voice. I will not keep you in a cage, no matter how comfortable. It doesn't feel like a cage, I said, my fingers tightening on his arm. It feels safe. He made a harsh sound in the back of his throat. I'm not a safe man. I know, I said, but you are an honest one. Your world is dangerous, but it is true. The world I came from, Julian's world, was polite and rotten to the core. I turned to face him fully, my hand sliding from his arm to his chest. I could feel the heavy, steady beat of his heart under my palm. Don't send me away, I pleaded softly. His hand came up and covered mine. His skin was warm, his calluses rough against my fingers. It was the first time he had initiated such a touch. To stay with me is to stay in the shadows, he warned, his voice a low growl. I have lived in my own kind of shadow for a long time, I replied. I'm not afraid of the dark. His thumb stroked the back of my hand, a gesture so unexpectedly tender it made my breath catch. This is your choice, he said, his voice strained. Completely. Without debt or obligation. If you stay as my equal, not as my ward. I understand, I whispered. And I did. He wasn't offering me a fairy tale. He was offering me a place beside him in the storm. He was offering me the truth of who he was, scars and all. And I was choosing to accept. There's one more thing, he said, his voice tight. What? The visionary ball you ran from is happening again tomorrow night. A reconstituted version, under new management. Thorne's final public execution. I shivered, remembering the humiliation. He'll be there. He is being forced to make a public statement before his arrest, to formally dissolve the foundation. I understood. It was the final act. I want you to be there, Kalen said. Why? Because the story began with you running from that room in shame, he said, his voice hardening. It will end with you walking back into it with your head held high. They will not see a victim. They will see the woman who brought down an empire. He was not asking me to be a trophy. He was giving me my power back. He was giving me the chance to rewrite my own ending. I'll go, I said, my voice clear and steady. Good, he said. His hand was still covering mine, a warm, solid weight over my heart. You will not go as a stray, I picked up, he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. You will go as my guest. He lifted my hand from his chest, turned it over, and pressed his lips to the center of my palm. A ghost of a kiss. A brand. A promise. In that moment, I knew I was no longer running from anything. I was walking toward my future. And it was as dangerous and as beautiful as the scarred man standing before me. The following evening, the air in the suite was thick with a different kind of anticipation. Leo, his eyes bright and curious, watched as a woman with quiet hands helped me with my hair and makeup. It was a strange experience to be adorned for a visual world I could not participate in. But I felt the silk of the dress Kalen had chosen for me. It was not black like my old dress of shame. It was a deep, midnight blue, the fabric cool and heavy, flowing around me like water. It was simple, elegant, and powerful. When Kalen arrived to collect me, the room fell silent. Leo let out a low whistle. Wow, he said. I smiled. How do I look? I asked him. Like you own the place, he said, his voice full of pride. Kalen walked towards me. He didn't say a word. He simply held out his arm. I took it. His arm was solid as rock beneath his tuxedo. Be safe, Ilara, Leo said, his voice suddenly serious. I will be, I said, and I knew it was true. The man whose arm I held was the most dangerous man in the city, and I had never felt safer in my life. The ballroom was the same, yet entirely different. The wall of sound was there, the clinking glasses, the music. But this time I was not on the outside looking in. I was at the center of the storm. As Kalen led me into the room, a hush fell. It was not the silence of pity or confusion this time. It was a silence of shock, of awe, of fear. Kalen Rock, the phantom of the city's underworld, was here. And on his arm was the blind girl who had, a few weeks ago, been thrown out of this very room. I could feel hundreds of eyes on us, a physical pressure. But I kept my head high, my hand resting on Kalen's arm. He led us to a table at the very front, a table that was clearly reserved for the guest of honor. As we sat, the murmuring started, a wave of whispers spreading through the room. I ignored it. I focused on the man beside me, his solid, calming presence. After some time, the lights dimmed. A man I didn't know, the new head of the reconstituted charity, went on stage and gave a brief, somber speech about new beginnings and accountability. And then he said the name. And now, a final word from the founder of the original Thorn Foundation, Mr. Julian Thorn. A smattering of confused, hesitant applause. I heard his footsteps as he walked to the podium. They were not the confident stride of the man I remembered. They were heavy, shuffling. The footsteps of a defeated man. He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he began, his voice thin and reedy, all the polished charm gone. I stand before you tonight, a humbled man." He stumbled through a pre-written speech about misjudgments and accounting errors. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. Everyone in the room knew it. As he spoke, his eyes scanned the crowd. I felt them land on our table. His voice faltered for a moment. I felt a wave of pure, undiluted hatred from him, so potent it was like a cold wind. Then he seemed to rally himself for one last, desperate act of spite. "But the greatest misjudgment," he said, his voice gaining a venomous strength, "was in allowing my judgment to be clouded by those with manipulative intentions, those who would use their own misfortune as a weapon to exploit the goodwill of others." He was talking about me. One last attempt to poison the well, to cast me as the villain of his downfall. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Before he could continue, Kalen moved. He didn't stand. He simply lifted a single finger. Across the room, I knew Marcus had seen the signal. Suddenly, the large screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the charity's logo, flickered to life. They did not show financial records. They did not show bank statements. They showed a video. Security footage from the hospital corridor outside my suite. It was silent, but the images were damning. It showed Julian, his face twisted in a mask of rage and obsession, threatening me. It showed him grabbing my arm. Then the video cut, and an audio file began to play. It was Julian's voice, captured by a hidden device. "She's mine," the voice snarled, a recording of a phone call he must have made. "She thinks this brute can protect her? I will destroy her. I will make everyone see her for the pathetic, manipulative creature she is. She will come crawling back to me." The audio cut off. The ballroom was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was Julian's own ragged breathing, amplified by the microphone. His polished facade had not just cracked. It had been atomized. In its place was the raw, ugly truth of the monster beneath. He stood there, exposed, his face a mask of horror. Then, two uniformed police officers walked calmly onto the stage, one on either side of him. The public execution was complete. As they led him away, a broken, shuffling figure, the ballroom remained silent. No one looked at him. They looked at us. They looked at Kalen, who sat impassively, as if watching a mildly interesting play. And they looked at me. But I no longer felt their stares as a pressure. They were just eyes, and they couldn't touch me. Kalen leaned over to me, his voice a low rumble in my ear, meant only for me. "The story is over," he said. "No," I whispered back, turning to him. "This is the beginning." He looked at me, and for the first time, in the reflection of the clinking glasses and the murmuring crowd, I was sure that if I could see, I would see him smile. We didn't stay. Kalen stood, took my hand, and led me from the ballroom. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. This time, as we left, I was not running in shame. I was walking in triumph. We didn't go back to the hospital. The silent car took us to a part of the city I didn't recognize, up a winding road to a place where the air grew cooler and the noise of the city faded into a distant memory. We arrived at his home. It was not a house, but a fortress of glass and steel perched on a cliffside, overlooking the glittering expanse of the city below. Inside, it was vast, silent, and minimalist. The air smelled of stone, leather, and the faint, clean scent of rain. He led me to a sprawling living area with a wall made entirely of glass. He poured us both a drink, pressing a cool, heavy tumbler into my hand. We stood by the window, the city lights a galaxy at our feet. "The debt is paid, Ilera," he said, his voice soft. "Julian is gone. Your brother is safe. You are free." He said the words again. Free. But this time, I knew what they meant. They were not a dismissal. They were a question. "I know," I said. I took a sip of my drink. It was whiskey, smoky and smooth. I set the glass down and turned to him. "I have a question for you, Kalen," I said. "Ask it. That first night, you asked me who I was running from. What?" He was silent for a moment. I could hear the soft clink of ice in his glass. "Because of how you ran," he said finally. "You weren't just fleeing a place. You were fleeing a person. It was personal. I recognized it." "Recognized what?" "The desperation of a good person pushed too far by a cruel one," he said, his voice rough. "It is a particular kind of energy. I have seen it before. In himself." He didn't have to say it. I could hear it in his voice. I could feel it on his skin. I reached out and touched his face, my fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, then leaned into my touch. "You're tense," I whispered. A low sound, half chuckle, half groan, rumbled his chest. "I'm always tense," he admitted. "Let me help," I said. It was not an offer of payment this time. It was an offer of care. He led me to a room that was his private study. It smelled of old books and him. There was no massage table here, just a large leather armchair. He took off his tuxedo jacket, his tie, and unbuttoned his shirt. He sat in the chair, his back to me. Section S. I knelt behind him, and I placed my hands on his shoulders. The scars were there, a familiar, tragic landscape under the fine cotton of his shirt. This time, I did something different. My fingers traced the largest scar, the ragged one near his shoulder blade. "Tell me about this one," I whispered. He went rigid. For a moment, I thought he would pull away, that I had crossed a line. But then he let out a long, slow breath. "I was 17, he said, his voice so low it was almost inaudible. "My father was not a good man. He owed the wrong people. They came to collect. I got in the way. It was the first piece of his past he had ever given me. A single, sharp shard. My fingers moved to the small, puckered circle below it. And this one, later," he said, his voice tight. "A business disagreement." I continued, my hands moving over his back, my questions soft. Each scar had a name, a place, a memory. Moscow, Marseille, a betrayal by a man he had trusted, a defense of someone who couldn't defend themselves. I was not just feeling the story anymore. He was telling it to me. He was unpacking the brutal baggage of his life and letting me hold it, piece by piece. My hands were not just massaging muscles. They were bearing witness. They were offering absolution. When I finished, there were no more words. The room was filled with a profound, peaceful silence. He had let me in completely into the most guarded, painful parts of him. He stood up and turned to face me. His shirt was open, revealing the scarred terrain of his chest. He reached out and gently cupped my face in his hands. His thumb stroked my cheeks. "You see me, Ilera," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that was raw and overwhelming. "With no eyes, you see me more clearly than anyone in my entire life. And you see me," I answered, my own voice trembling. He lowered his head, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not rough or demanding. It was a question, a discovery, a homecoming. It was the taste of whiskey and loneliness and a desperate, long-buried hope. It was the feel of calloused hands being gentle. It was the quiet certainty of two broken people finding their missing pieces in the other. In his arms, in his fortress on the cliff, I was not a blind girl or a charity case or a victim. I was home. A few months passed. The city settled. Julian Thorne was a forgotten nightmare, his name a byword for disgrace. Leo was thriving. He had moved into a small apartment near his new university, his eyes full of the future. He loved Kaylin in the way a boy loves a formidable, protective older brother. He was the only one who dared to make fun of him, once asking him if all his meetings involved so much glowering. Kaylin had just grunted, but I had felt the corner of his mouth twitch. I did not live with Kaylin, not yet. It was a choice we had made together. I had my own life. I had reopened my massage practice in a small, beautiful studio in a quiet part of the city. Kaylin had paid for it, of course, but he had done it under the guise of an anonymous arts grant, a gesture of respect for my independence that I cherished. My clients came, old and new, drawn to the quiet sanctuary I had created. But my last appointment of every day was always the same. At 6 o'clock, a silent black car would pull up outside my studio. Sometimes it would take me to his fortress on the cliff. Other times, it would take us to a small, obscure restaurant where no one knew his face. And sometimes he would just come to my small apartment, and I would cook for him, and he would sit in my tiny kitchen, a giant in a doll's house, looking more at peace than he ever did in his own palace. Our relationship was a thing of quiet moments, of hands held under a table, of his head in my lap as I read to him from a book of poetry, of me falling asleep to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. He was still a man of shadows and violence. His world had not changed, but he had carved out a space of light in it for me. And I, in turn, had found the calm at the center of his storm. One evening, I made a decision. I packed a small bag. I told my last client I was taking a vacation. When the black car arrived, I didn't get in. I gave the driver, a man who had long since learned not to question me, a note. Then I took a taxi. I gave the driver the address to Kaylin's home. I walked up to the vast, imposing front door, and for the first time, I knocked. It took a long time for him to answer. When the door opened, he was standing there, my note in his hand. He was not wearing a suit. He was in simple gray sweats, his feet bare. He looked unguarded, worried. "Alara," he said, his voice tight. "I'm tired of the commute," I said simply, a small smile playing on my lips. He stared at me for a long moment. I could feel him searching my face, my posture, my very presence for the meaning behind my words. And then he understood. A slow, beautiful, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his harsh features into something breathtaking. He didn't say anything. He just stepped aside and held out his hand. I walked in, and the door closed behind me, shutting out the rest of the world. This is the story I wanted to tell you. It is not a story about being rescued. It is a story about being seen. Some people have perfect sight, but are blind to the truth of others. They see a fragile girl, a monster, a victim. And some people, with nothing but their hands and their hearts, can read the story of a man's soul written on his skin. He never let anyone touch his scars. They were his armor, his history, his prison. But they were not a wall I had to break down. They were a door. And he was the one who, in the end, opened it for me. And we walked through it together,